a start then. Okay, Rob. So Rob asked me if I could go through how I do the diving, highboard diving images, which I'm very happy to do. And so if I bring up my Lightroom screen now and drag that across. And so an example of what we end up with is here, say. So that's an example of what we'll eventually end up with. And so the project started by me going up to Ponds Forge. It's an international diving centre up in Sheffield, Rob. And I wanted to photograph some highboard divers. I'd seen images in competitions, which I really liked. And so I went up there and asked, and it took a little while to get the confidence because a lot of these are quite young, really. I mean, they start them as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. And obviously you're photographing kids, and obviously you're photographing kids in swimwear. So I had to, one of the few places where I did have to actually produce my DBS certificate, is it? Used to be called CRB, didn't it? Criminal Record. Where, you know, but you can do that online, and I'm sure you've probably got one, Rob, anyway.
Yeah, sure.
And the actual shoot, I went up and I did 2 or 3 of their training sessions, and then they let me go to one of their galas and whatever, and then I actually photographed a competition there. It was the Junior Championships, because it's quite a high standard diving club. And I got images, but the problem, you'll know this, the problem really is light whenever you're indoors. You know, you walk in and to the human eye, there's plenty of light, but to a camera, there's not enough light, particularly if you've got to try and capture skin tones and what have you. The ISO goes up. And my problem I find with ISO going up, it's all right to capture action, but if you want to work on skin tones, you know, and zoom in, then that's when ISO becomes a real problem, because the skin tones just kind of all disappear. And so it became quite obvious to me that I needed to have some flash on the stand and on the diving platform. And that was quite a big gig, really, if you think about it. And it required, you know, I'd probably been working with the club 3 or 4 months before I even dared ask. And then I asked the dive manager, and I took her through all the precautions and how it would all be strapped down and so on and so forth. And we tried it first with just a couple of, you know, really tame divers, for want of a better word, who were very experienced divers, and they didn't have any problem. There was some worry about would the flash sort of semi-blind them momentarily, but of course it doesn't. It's so instantaneous that it's not a problem. And so I think what would be a good idea, it only takes a minute, if I just show you on, this is my YouTube channel, if I just show you, it's a 1-minute video, so in the playlist here. If I can play it, So you can obviously see from that little video, Rob, how I did it. I was sat in the stands and using my remote triggers. I was probably about 60 meters away, but it's absolutely no problem at all for those quality remote triggers. I'm sure you've got some for sport.
Yes.
And it was absolutely no problem at all. And I've done 3 sessions like it. The first was just with a couple of divers. And then the second one, they recruited about 5 or 6 divers. And then the third one, it worked for everybody, because what she did was she actually, I'm just trying to get all the pictures. What she did was she made some money for the club, because what she did was she offered it to parents. By then we'd already got a few shots which I'd worked up. And of course, you know, the parents, because these are mainly young people, they're spending countless hours sat in the stands watching the kids do this. And of course, it's very hard to get a good picture. And, you know, the best pictures they've got are probably with a phone or whatever. So when they saw the standard of these pictures, you know, they were obviously blown away. And so what she did, she put a shout out to parents and said, Davey's prepared to come along. And if you want a framed, well, not framed, but mounted A3 picture, plus as many digital copies as you want of all the shots, then it'd be £20. And come along at, I think it was 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and they came along at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I got the platform, blah, blah, blah. And I think about 14 kids came. And I just shot them, and then I picked the best one that I thought was the best one, worked that up, printed it, and that's what the parents got for the £20. And I gave them all the digital versions of all the shots, if you like, so they kind of got all this, but they got the workup ones as well. So all the workups, in fact, there were 14, and these are the workups. And so it worked for everybody, basically, and I'm a big believer in doing this. I've done it on numerous sports now, and it really does work, where you get what you want, but the participants get something that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to get. So it's a great way of working, really, but it requires, you know, you've got to play the long game, obviously, and build up the confidence and so on, and then give something back for nothing. But of course, in the process, you'll get these images. So let's get to the whole point of this morning, which is let's work up an image. So I've just picked one of them, and you can see it's just come straight out of Lightroom. Very minimal changes in Lightroom. Just maybe, I usually hit the auto button in Lightroom and see what it does, but I've done very little to it in Lightroom because I want to do all the work here in Photoshop. So just one quick word about this down this side sometimes confuses people because it doesn't look like the standard Photoshop work area. I use Photoshop, I use Adobe Creative Cloud Plan for photographers, so you've always got the latest version of Photoshop and Lightroom. And this is a plugin, Rob, which is called the TK Action Panel, short for Tony Kuiper Action Panel. It was developed initially to do luminosity masking, but I very, very rarely use it for that. What it does is give you loads of buttons that makes Photoshop actions very easy. But none of the things that are in here cannot be done by just doing it the long way around. It just invariably means 2 or 3 presses of a button as opposed to 1. So don't be worried. It's free, by the way. There are paid for versions, about 20 quid, but the free version gives you all of these buttons anyway. I find it invaluable. It's just a little tool that I use all the while. It just speeds up my workflow. So you'll see me use it, but there's nothing in there that you can't get access to in the normal Photoshop CC. So the first thing I want to do is explain to you where the background comes from, and because it's a technique I use a lot. So if I know I'm going to shoot lots of sports people in a reasonably controlled environment, so which this obviously is, they're diving off a board. It's going to be, the board's always going to be there. It's always going to be in the same position. I've used it with squash. I'm just doing a project at the moment with fences, you know, the swords fences, and I've created a background there. So I do this a lot. I spend probably a couple of hours and create a standard background. Do it with athletics as well. I think the other night in the presentation, you asked me, was the background to the high jumper imported? Yes, it very much was. And I've got a number of sort of standard backgrounds that I've created. And so this was a particular case in point. I knew I was going to work up lots of these, silly to keep recreating the wheel. So basically that is the angle. So where you saw the camera in the stands, that is exactly the same angle. The board's the other way around, I flipped it, but it's exactly the same angle and distance, perspective. But the background in this question, in this image, was shot at a diving gala. So you can actually see there are people in the seats behind. And of course, when I did the real shoot, there was no one there at all. But I'd already got this shot because I knew what I was working up to. So I'd already made sure I got plenty of these shots. And I basically just get them by taking my camera, manually focusing it, out of focus, and then taking shots. And once you start using this kind of project-based methodology for sports shots, which of course is complete antithesis of your normal work, where you have to record things absolutely accurately. But once you start thinking along the lines of, I'm going to create a sports shot that is a creative sports shot, it's still a sportsman, they're still doing what they want, what they do, it's them, but I'm going to make it as powerful as I can, or as artistic as I can. Then you start thinking, even when you're at a competition, where obviously, you know, you're recording the action as it goes on, my mind's always thinking about, well, how could I later on create something out of this? And so consequently, I'm always shooting these out of focus backgrounds. So if I'm stood on the finishing line of the 100 meters or the hurdles, I will, you know, take just a minute to manually focus, put it out of focus, and get a blurred background like this. And consequently, I always come back from whatever sport I've done, whatever sport, I'll always come back with a little selection of these out of focus backgrounds. Yeah. If they're not out of focus enough for you, then you can go up here and filter, blur, and there's a whole list of blurs you can use here. There's field blur, or field blur is what it says, it's camera blur. You decide on the point that you would have been focusing on, so we could move it to the end of the board. And then up here, we can increase the blur. And if you see, if I take it right up, look, it's becoming virtually indiscernible. So even if your background's not as blurred as you want, there are these tools that you can use. Another one I use is Gaussian blur as well, but they're all up there in your filter blur gallery. There's the path blur, spin blur, great for wheels on motorbikes and so on. And then down here is Gaussian blur. That's something I use quite a lot as well. So that's the first thing. If your background's not as out of focus as you'd like, then by all means increase the blur on it. Now you'll notice on the images that I showed you, I had replaced the platform with a diving board, and just quite simply a diving board. That this is the gala in question, actually, where the crowd shots were taken, and it's just simply that board, which I will have quite simply cut out really easily. Probably just use a lasso tool, something like that, and then the move tool, and you can move that in to I think it was that one, wasn't it? There we go. Move that in, and as you can see, and now we can position it. I won't go into detail as to how I do this, because you're going to see it with the diver. Now, why did I do that? And so quite simply, you know, you obliterate this board and move this board in. And there's a program in Photoshop called Warp, Perspective Warp, and you can actually make this board bend slightly. Now, why did I do that? Well, I did it because, in my opinion, I'm going to get rid of that, switch that off. In my opinion, everything that I do is prepared for the 3 to 5 second look that a panel of 3 judges are going to give it in a competition. And I don't want there to be any ambiguity in the image that might cause them to distract for even half a second. I want them to understand the image really quickly and really simply. And in my opinion, there's a danger that of not quite knowing what that is. And I don't think it's very aesthetically pleasing either, actually. It's just a concrete block at the end of the day. Whereas I'm going to go now to the master one. Whereas what we all associate with diving is a diving board, isn't it? And so that's why I took out the concrete platform and put in the diving board. So you can see this is my standard background now. You'll see up here it's called Boardmaster Flat, and all the diving images that I work up are going to be imported into this background. So I keep that background separate, and it's there ready and waiting. Sometimes I'll flip it just to add a bit of interest or whatever, but it's not to be forgot that when you put in images in competitions, which is what this is aimed at, they're only seeing one of them, aren't they? So unless you do a panel, it's not that they see 3 or 4 at the same time, which gives the game away. And so there we go. That's the background. And as I say, I've done it with, and some sports take quite a long time to build up an empty background. So, for instance, an empty squash court probably took me 2 or 3 hours to create an empty squash court with sufficient interest in the background, but blur. But boy, is it worth it, because it then means that you can do what we're going to do in a minute, and create really nice, powerful images really quite quickly. Okay, so how do we do it then? So here's the image that I've chosen. As I say, it's come into, I'll get rid of that. I'll just do a bit of practice before you're right. It's come into Photoshop with very, very little work done on it. One of the advantages of shooting with that flash is because it's high speed flash, so I think I'm shooting at 1600th of a second, might be even faster, then it does naturally make the background go quite dark, and that's really helpful with the cutting out. So how are we going to cut it out? Well, I don't know whether you use this tool at all, but about probably about a year ago now, there was a Photoshop update in Photoshop CC, and they introduced this select subject tool, and it's absolutely fantastic. So quick select tool, it's up here, it's your standard Photoshop channel, and go up across the top and just hit select subject, and it goes away and it does its stuff. And depending how complicated it is, it comes back. So hopefully you can you see that on your screen, Rob? That's
perfect. Yes, yeah.
Perfect, right. Okay. Now, what it's working on is contrast. So if there is not a lot of contrast between the subject and the background, then it finds it more difficult. And we'll see that in a minute when we zoom in. But providing there is sufficient contrast between the subject and the background, it does a stunning job, in my opinion, as a starter for 10. How does it know that it's the diver that I want and not the lights? If you notice, it's got a bit of the lights, actually. Well, what it does is it's using, Adobe call it Sensei technology. Nah, come on. What it's basically doing is it's looking for the area of greatest contrast in the image. And by definition, it'll be the area you're focused on, usually, won't it? That'll be where the greatest contrast is. And therefore, that gives it a starter for 10. I do believe that they've built in some algorithms that looks for the shape of a human body as well, and goes, no, yeah, there's a human body there. It must be that, not this sign. But I don't think it's all powerful, which is, but it does a stunning job most of the time. Right, let's zoom in. Let's make it do an even better job. So what we do is I use a Wacom tablet all the while. So really essential tool for me. So let's zoom in a little bit, just pressing the Z key, and we'll zoom in. And then by pressing the space key, we can move about. Now, the first thing is, look, it's selected a bit of these lights, and we don't want that. So if we make sure the quick select tool is selected, can you see I'm altering the size of the tool, the brush, the tool, by using the ring on my Wacom tablet. And can you see at the moment it's got a plus in it? And that means anything that I go over will be added to the selection. So if I was to do that, now it's added all the rings, gone, oh, you meant me to add that. But of course, we didn't mean it to select that. So by pressing the Alt key, we can actually make it stop selecting that. And as you can see, it's gone away now. You see the little bit there, look. So we get rid of that. So all I'm doing is, its normal default is with the plus, and all I'm doing is pressing the Alt key. So what I basically do is start at a point and just work my way around the subject. So can you see it's missed a little bit of her foot? In fact, I'll work this way around, which is normally the way. We'll come back to that at the end. I usually work clockwise. So by pressing the space key, I'm just working up her body to see if anywhere where it's not done a really good job. And can you see there, it's just not selected that bit of a swimming costume, because of course the difference in contrast between the swimming costume and the background is so small. So all we do is just gently wipe across and give Photoshop a helping hand. We say, yeah, I did want you to include that. And we move around, we come to the hair. Now, I'm going to show you how we do the hair in a minute, okay? So don't worry too much about it. But what I know is I don't need all this black here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, press the Alt key, and I'm going to get rid of that little bit there. But this row of drops here is really quite nice, and I think I'm going to risk. I'm not going to select these. We're going to do this in a minute. I'm going to, for the time being, I'm going to say don't select those, Photoshop. But I'm happy for it to select. In fact, I think I'll come a bit further down, actually, back to there. But I'm happy for it to select all of this, because as you can see, it's more drop than it is background, for want of a better word. And we move around, and hair's always a problem. And can you see here that if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see it's had a real problem because the colour of her hair is very similar to the background. So I just give it a helping hand, just go around the edge like that, and it'll snap into position. And if it's gone a bit over, which it has there, look, it's really hard for even me to see, never mind Photoshop. Just press the Alt key and moving around, and it really pays to spend a little bit of time at this stage. Can you see there? Really hard for Photoshop that it's missed the extremity of a wrist, because the wristband is black and the background is black, but I don't want that little bit there. Okay, so I will spend, depending on how complex the subject is, I will spend, quite a bit of time at this stage, because this is absolutely vital to get a good selection. And now you can see where it's missed the extremity of her ankle, so we'll go down to there. It pays not to make it do too much at once. Now, you can see what it's done there. It's jumped out, and I obviously don't want all that. And I find it's better to let it jump out and then wipe over from the other way, because somehow it seems you give it more better clue. And there you go, you see. So a little bit there. And you kind of get used to I find it's almost like my little friend, and I think, I know what you're not very good at. I'll give you a clue. Yeah. But you'll find, because it's obviously working on an algorithm, isn't it? And what you find is that, there are certain things it's absolutely rubbish at doing, and there are other things it's better at doing. There we go. Okay, so we've now gone all the way around the subject. I'm going to zoom out to normal size on the TK action panel. It's just that one there. And can you see what's happened? This is why you always go out to normal size. At some point, as we've gone around the selection, it's missed, because that was selected before. This is very common, and it's because at some point you've selected a bit and the algorithm's gone, oh, well, there's another bit up there like that. But it's very easy to put it back in. It all snaps back in so much better when it's done it the first time. And just round like that, back of her head. Okay, so I'm reasonably happy with that as my initial selection. Right, here's the real magic of this tool. If you now go and press this button here, select and mask, what it does is it goes away and you configure this. It used to be called Refine Edge in previous versions. But when they did this in this update, they enhanced this whole screen, and it really is very powerful. So you can, it suddenly makes us, what you selected jumps out. Now I use red, but we could change that color to anything we want. You could have blue, you could have green. And I won't go through all these, you can do all that, but you can, you know, you can get a screenshot of this, or I can tell you my settings. But over a period of, you know, a year, a bit more of using it, I've settled on these settings for this screen, this particular section, and I find it works really well. Now, the power is up here, this refine edge brush, okay? So you need to make sure that one's selected. And what this is Photoshop's real detail selector. So obviously the algorithm is much more precise. And what we find is, by using that brush there, but if we find now, if we just go up and just follow, you don't want the brush to be much bigger than the drops. Can you see how it selected them?
Okay.
And you just go over the edge of the hair. It's really good for the edge of hair, and because now it'll start to pick all those edges up. And often at this stage, it looks rubbish, but you've got to have the faith. Have the faith. You'll see in a minute. And you can see all I'm doing is just following. Hopefully you can see the resolution. I'm just following up the line of drops, basically. And trust me, what it's doing is, you don't do too much at once and don't be too quick, because there's a lot of powerful whirring and banging going on in the background, and you'll see. So I wouldn't dream of doing more than that little bit there. And then I let it stop. Did you see it thinking about it?
Yeah.
And depending how powerful your machine is, it'll take longer, because there must be a really powerful algorithm going on here, which is saying, now I really want, clearly this is real detailed stuff. This is what this person's telling me. I need to really apply some processing power and be really defined as to the amount of contrast that I allow to you know, to allow me to make a selection. And so we go back, and I'm not going to try and get every drop, because I'm going to show you another method. We're going to draw some drops in, actually. But I want to try and get the majority. Well, not the majority, but I certainly want, I tell you what I really want to make sure, that I've selected enough so that I know the pattern of drops when I come to draw some in later. Because it's the pattern, the way the drops are spinning off of her body, that is so hard for us to, you know, as human beings, just to predict. I suppose if you look at hundreds of these pictures, but you know, it does come off in swirls, of course it does, but the shape of that swirl is really hard. And hopefully you can see, all I'm doing is just, and so where these drops are isolated quite away from a body, I'm not there. I made a mistake there. I went over the whole, and there's not really a row of drops, and that was a bit silly on me. We'll get rid of them in a minute. Okay. So I just go around, get some off of her feet. There's always, and by the way, what I did was, when I got these divers to jump off the board, we had a bucket of water with a sponge in it, and they absolutely drench themselves.
Yeah, it's I wondered why there was so much water on their hair at the top of a board.
Yeah, and you know, another example, Rob, really, of don't let reality get in the way. You know, all you try, what you know, I think I said in my sports talk to you the other night to your club. I'm just going over the edge of a hair. That I create a sporting image that best depicts the emotion and the drama, and you know, without the drops, it looks like a static image.
Yeah, exactly. It's what makes the picture work, is the actual swirl of water. It gives a sense of motion to it and a direction to it as well. So it does work.
And we had 2 buckets up there with 2 sponges. They sponged themselves, and then I had a person up on the board, Marlies, and she was literally drenching them. Because it's kids, they love it, don't they? Anyway, so you know what I mean. It wasn't hard. Okay, so I'd be quite happy at that. And now go down to here. And this is where it says output 2, and we need to make sure it's output 2 new layer with layer mask. And if you tick remember settings, then once you've done this once, it comes in like it every time. As I say, if you've not used this screen before, I'd suggest just take a screenshot of my settings, and it'd be a good starter for 10. I'm not saying you can't improve on it, but and so I just go OK.
Yes.
And what it's done now, look, is bring it back into Photoshop, and here's this layer, and the background's disappeared. If I switch the background back on, now what we do is we now need to move that cutout into our background. And so the way I do that, there's a number of ways you can do it, but the simplest way is to select the layer, left click and drag. Can you see the layer moving across?
I can, yep.
Up to the tab. Once you get up to the tab, it opens that tab, bring it down anywhere in the image and left click drop. And there it is, it's in. Now, at this stage, you have committed quite a lot of energy to getting that cut out. So this would be the point where I would definitely save it. Because what you don't want to do is lose this. So I'm going to call this Zoom example PSM, Photoshop Master, and just hit save. And it'll take it a little while down here because there's quite a lot going on, but definitely do it at this stage before you do anything else, because now you have got that selection safe. Otherwise, if your machine crashed, you're back to all that selecting work. Okay, quite obviously she's too big and she's not in the right place. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make the screen a little bit smaller. Like this, just by pressing this up here to make the canvas a little bit smaller. It's a TK action panel. And now, making sure that she's selected, we're going to go Edit, Free Transform. And that's my go-to method of dragging cutouts around. And as you can see now, it's put a bounding box around it, and we can move her wherever we want. Now, the first thing is, she's obviously far too big for that. You can tell that from that board. And anyway, even if she wasn't, she's too big to get all the swirl in. So the first thing I'm going to do is make her a little bit smaller, and just get her to something like the right size. And it's a matter of doing it by eye, really, but I probably would want her a little bit big. Well, let's do this. The beauty now is we're not limited to the angle she left the board. We can now add as much drama as we want. And to me, that is straight away a more dramatic image.
Yes.
Because I'm a big believer in working in diagonals. We read like left to right, as you know, so always make your image read left to right. That's the way you've read any page since you were 3 years old, 4 years old. So you always bear in mind the eye will naturally start here and work over there. So that's the way you want your image to read, from the point of interest to it leaving. And diagonals work really well to fill the frame. And of course, because we've now put her on the diagonal, we can make her a little bit bigger as well. So I think she does need to be a little bit bigger. So I'm looking at how big her foot is relative to that board. And I might want to make her just a fraction bigger again. But I'd say that's pretty good. I like the way we've got all the swirling, and I like the way that we're reading left to right. So we just accept that up here. Ooh. There we go, we accept that. And now we've got her. I'll make the screen full size again. And now we've got her. Now, this is where we now refine if any of the selections come in that we don't like, okay? And the way we do that is by drawing on the mask, okay? So you can see it's come in and it's brought in a mask. And if I disable this mask here, there's a background. There's everything that we've cut out, because that's the beauty. Do you remember we used export in the export screen, export to new layer with layer mask. So it comes in with a mask. Now the beauty of that is, therefore, that if we feel there's something that is missing, we can draw on this mask, on a mask, you probably already know, but white reveals and black conceals. And so if I was to take, on the mask, make sure the mask's selected. If I was to select a white brush, just white brush, and draw at 100% opacity, and I'll make it semi-hard. Okay, so watch what happens. Whoops, not on full screen. So if I were to draw now, remember I'm not drawing on the image, I'm drawing on the mask. Watch what happens. Can you see the background starting to come in?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the original background. It's all still there. There, that's a better way to show. There it all is. I'm recreating it. I'm allowing you to look through that mask and see the background. Now, why is that important? I just went back on the history panel there and just stepped back off. Well, it's important if we I would zoom in again now, and I would do the same thing. I would start moving around the image and looking if there's any bits that, now, there's a great example. Can you see that bit there, Rob? You can see that I missed it. And what that is, that little bit there, if I zoom in even further, then that, look, is the background. And that's obviously no good. And it's also a bit ropey here. So this is how we're going to improve it. So by using the Wacom tablet, I can rotate the canvas using my pen. I've got a YouTube video on it if you want to know how to do that. Now, remember what I've got to do. I'm drawing on the mask. I need it now to be black. Black conceals, white reveals. I need a brush. I need it to be semi-hard, not a really hard edge. And watch what happens. Can you see how the background's disappearing? Mm-hmm. And so and you can see here, look, actually it's gone the other way. We've not got enough of her leg in. Is the resolution good enough for you to see this, right?
Oh, yeah, perfect, yes.
Okay, so if I now switch this to a white brush, watch, we'll draw in a leg. You see?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we move around, there's a bit of a leg missing again, look. And I would suggest it's brought in a faint halo, so we're drawing black again, we're drawing on the mask, and we go around. And with a Wacom tablet, with a pen, it's this pen here, then I'm a massive believer in this for detailed work, because what you're doing now is doing what, again, you've done since you were 3 years old. This is what you've been used to using a pen. And when you first get it, it drives you crazy. You want to throw it through the roof, through the window. But eventually you become really proficient and really quick. You can see here, it's missed a little bit of a costume. So now we need to make sure we're drawing white, need the brush tool, and watch that little bit of a costume. It comes back. There's a little bit of a costume, it's missed again. And so you can see that, so all I do is I work my way around. Now we come to the bit which we know will be a bit dodgy, and it's a hair. Now, it's not too bad actually, because to be honest, the hair would have been wet anyway. But if we just, I'm using white, so bear in mind I'm bringing back what was there in the original. And we just work our way around, and this looks a very hard edge here. And because the background was already dark, we can afford, I've probably gone a bit far there, so I changed the brush to black, to the colour back to white. And it's really important, I'm not, obviously, and I know you know this, but I'm not drawing on the image, I'm drawing on the mask. I'm affecting what I'm allowing to come through from the original image. I know that looks a bit ropey there, look, hair does not look like that. And don't get too, you don't want to get too hung up about it, because at the end of the day, this is still going to be quite small in the frame of hair. And if you do your job right, the viewer's eyes will not be looking at how well you cut out the hair, because they won't believe you have cut it out, because they will believe it's absolutely real. So they're not looking for it. What tends to happen when you do any compositing, which is what this is, of course, because you know it's not real, you know where to look, and you can get yourself in a right tangle, oh, it's not good enough, and everybody will spot it. And the way the acid test is, have a trusted colleague who you work with, and send them the image when it's ready, and ask them to do a critique on it. and don't tell them whether it's cut out or not. Once they've worked with you a while, they'll start to guess. But if they don't come back and say, is that cut out, then you've pretty much, you've cracked it. If they come back and say that looks cut out, then you're in trouble. Now there's a bit of background look that we probably don't want. So, and in fact, that's on the master look. I know it's on the master because look, it's not, even with a black pen, there's the background. Yeah. Even with a black, so it's clearly that's on the background. So you can see that very quickly. I'll reset it to normal size. You work your way around, but when I say very quickly, this is the key bit, really. This is the bit where if you don't get it right, you'll give the game away. You know what I mean? And consequently, it's worth taking. And this stage, when I'm doing any sort of compositing, is where a lot of the time goes. I spend an awful lot of time cutting out, and then an awful lot of time refining the selection when I get it into the background to make sure there's no glaring omissions, obvious errors. But you'll very quickly get into it. Now, what we next do now at this stage, I would save all the while as I'm going along. So I just hit save button and you see it's saving down here, because you're already investing quite a bit of time. And what you don't want is a Photoshop crash. Photoshop does back up. You can set it for times and it'll back up automatically. But even at its most vigorous, you only really want it to be doing that every 10 or 15 minutes because it takes up processing power all the while. Yeah. So you need to keep saving regular. I've had too many instances where I've lost half an hour, 45 minutes of work when something's crashed. I live out in the sticks and we get power cuts quite a lot, and anything like that can crash. And sometimes Photoshop just crashes, it just does. So this is not looking too bad now. What we could do is decide now, we're going to come back to the drops in a minute, but what we could do now is just decide if we want to do anything to the diver. And so what we could do is making sure that the layer with the diver on is selected. We could try a couple of little adjustments. So one of my favorites is to go to the curves adjustment, and that was, did you notice there? All I did was press that. This is the TK action panel. But similarly, you could have got that adjustment down here, same place, and there, curves. So one of my favorite, just for a start, I'm a big believer in using the auto buttons. Because what's happened is that Adobe have had teams of engineers working on this for countless years to extract the most from an image. So, I'm a big believer in using it because you can always dial it back. And I don't know if you know this, something that you may not know, a lot of people don't know this, but if we hit auto, it will go away and it will do. And what it's done there is it's just, it's moved the dynamic range to get the most dynamic range. But clearly she's far too bright now. But let's just go back. If you press Alt under Auto, then this comes up. And what it now does is give you a choice of what algorithm to use. Okay, so now so we've got it on enhanced brightness and contrast. But what we could do is find dark and light colours and go okay. And now you see it's a completely different effect. I don't like it, I hate it. But it's well worth, looking at that. Now, anyway, let's go back to where we were. Let's see, whoops, wrong way. Sorry, need to go back and need to go Alt again to get back to standard brightness and contrast. And go okay. Now, do I like that or don't I like it? So I certainly don't like what it's done to the background. And I'd say, so just look at the diver at the moment. And if I dial it back on the diver, no, I don't even like what it's done on the diver, Rob. I don't think it's brought anything to the party at all. But this would be completely typical, so I've deleted that layer. Let's try another one of my favourite go-tos, which is down in the TK Action panel, which is called Clarity. And it brings in a little algorithm. And if I click OK. Now, I just want you to look at the diver, okay? And if I switch it on and I switch it off, can you see how it's enhanced the detail on the diver? Yep. And I call it cheap, you know, quick dodge and burn, really. And do you know what? I quite like that. That's not bad at all. But I don't want it to enhance the background. I don't want to pick out the detail in the background. I've deliberately made that blurry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this mask up so that it doesn't apply it to the background. Now, first thing I need to do, hopefully the resolution is big enough, Rob. Can you see how when I've twisted the image, I've still got these little bits of white showing on the corners? I don't want that. So I'm just going to go back to that mask. I'm going to pick up, and I'll tell you why I don't want, you'll see why I don't want it in a minute. I'm going to pick up my black brush, and I'm just going to watch up here as I draw. I appear to be just drawing on the background. And can you see it disappears? Yeah. That white area is disappearing. You'll see why that's important in a minute. A little bit up there. Right, now I know all I've got selected is the diver. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I want this clarity. I like what this is doing, but I only want it to apply to the diver. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this mask, which I've spent a lot of time refining. And if I click Alt and drag it up, then it applies that, it copies that mask to this layer. So now white reveals, black conceals. So now this adjustment is only being applied to the diver. So if you look now, we still get all these drops nicely emphasized. Okay. Let me just to give you a really clear example. Let's just do this. Let's put a brightness contrast adjustment layer on. Let's really bang it up ridiculously. Okay, ruin the image. And now, if I copy this mask up to there, can you see? It's just applying it to the diver. And so this is something that I do all the time. You've spent a lot of time. I can now adjust the brightness and contrast of just the diver. Can you see, by the way, there's still a bit of the background appearing? Yeah. It just became obvious when I did that. And so what I need to do is get rid of that. And so I just use the black brush again. Make sure I'm on the thing, there it goes. So it's a ghost that's coming from the background. Okay, so that just gives you an example. I'm going to get rid of that because it's obviously trashing the image completely. But this is why I spend an awful lot of time on creating a selection. So even if I'm not going to drag the selection into another background, I still do all the selecting. Because what that enables me to do is apply effects to the selection, which is invariably where I want you to look, and not to the background. And conversely, I can make the background darker and the subject lighter, or vice versa. Okay, so there's another quite nice little go-to in the TK Action panel, which is called the Autumn effect, Make It Glow, which is his version of the Autumn effect. And we'll just see what that does. Sometimes it's rubbish, and sometimes it's rubbish. Made it look like she's gone orange. And so definitely that's got to go. But I'll do this, you know, I mean, obviously you've got to start with some artistic intent, but it's very common for me to try things and no, that's not working, get rid of it, or dial it right down. So I would say at the moment she is still a bit too orange. So I'm going to do a vibrant saturation, which is up here. Let's do it this way just to prove, just to show you. So if you've not got the, I'm going to do hue saturation. No, I didn't want hue saturation. Wrong way. I wanted the one I said. So let me get rid of that. Because I so rarely go down here, I forget what they're called. It's that one. I'm just worried that she's a little bit too orangey, and so I want to reduce the orange in her. And so I'm just going to take down, vibrance is aimed at the colours in skin specifically. And so it's great at taking that down. So you can see I can make a super pasty, or I can make a super orange. And I would say she just needed to come down a little bit to there. But again, I've maybe gone a bit too far now. Again, you don't want it to apply to the background. So do the same again. Bring up your Alt, click, bring it up, and now it's only applying to her. Okay, and you can see you could carry on like that. Okay, the final thing that I want to show you then is that if it hadn't brought enough drops in, what I would do, and this is exactly what I would do. So I would go back to the original. Here's the original, and I would put a rough selection around here, just like this. Just use the rectangular marquee tool, like that. So this is the original, remember, and then I'm going to bring that into our image. Set. I can't do it that way, bear with me. I feared that wouldn't work actually. So let me do it this way. Tell you what, Control, deselect that, Control, Alt, I'll do it like that. And I'm going to use the Move tool again. I know why, that's why it's just bringing it, sorry. It was bringing in the masked version, and I don't want that obviously. Yeah. So Control, deselect, get rid of that altogether, it's done its job now. And we're just the normal background image, yeah? So Control, Alt, now bring it in. Bring the whole image in, drag up and drop. And here we are then, we need to go smaller, obviously, so we can see what's going on. We grab hold of this and we can edit free transform, and we can drag it around. Now this is so now our original image is on top of our new composite. Now, what we want to do is size this so that it matches our composite completely. And the way we're going to do that is we need to be able to see through it so that we can see what's below. And we can adjust how much we can see through a layer with the opacity up here. So watch, if I take the opacity, can you see how the more I go down, you're seeing through the image I've just brought in through to the new image. So I've took it to about 50%. You see I can drag her around. Right, now what we're going to do, Rob, is we're going to get this to match up with the image we've created. We made her a bit bigger. Doesn't have to be super accurate. And there you go, that's not bad as a starter for 10. It's near enough, okay? And I go, okay, select. And now what we do is we bring this layer back up to 100%. So now we can't see through this temporary layer at all. All we're seeing is, we're just seeing the original image. We can't see our composite underneath. What we do is we create a new layer, which with the TK Action panel is this tool here for a new layer. And now we just take a brush and we're going to use white, and it wants to be a really soft brush. And what we're going to do is, so you can see how big it is at the moment. If I do that, and you can see that's obviously far too big for a drop of water, and it's also too bright because these aren't exactly white. So let's turn down the opacity a little bit so you actually see, because water's semi-translucent. Well, it's completely translucent, isn't it? So you're actually seeing through the drop of water and to the background, so it isn't going to be completely white. And I'd say that's not bad now. So I think that's not bad for the colour. Now zoom in, okay, and move about, okay. And so let's take an area where we hadn't copied any dots in. Now, let's take this area here. Well, I tell you what, let's take this and let's extend it. And all we're going to do, quite simply, reduce the size of your brush. Can you see how small it is now? I'll zoom zoom in even further. And all we're going to do, the brush tool, is we're just going to create some water. And this is where, I mean, this is why it's so important to have a reasonable amount of the original come in, because otherwise you can't possibly get. But let's really exaggerate it, just for the sake of it. Now remember, all I'm doing is I'm drawing on this new layer, okay? You'll see why in a minute. Okay. And then adjust the size of your brush, even smaller, make the opacity even less so they become even more indistinct. And just don't, I mean, when I first started doing it, I used to actually directly trace the, you know, the drops. I used to do drop at a time, but I've now learned that providing, the way I'm going to prove what we can do, I'm going to just do this, look. I'm going to sign it with drops. Right, now, you might think I've gone completely insane. Now, remember what we do. We've brought in the original, we've used the original as to give us a guide, and we've created our own drops. Now, if I switch off the original, there we go, can you see? And if I now blur these drops, okay, so filter, blur, Gaussian blur, just watch. Gaussian blur at 16 pixels far too much, because they're small. But watch as I come down to around, maybe around about 3 something. And clearly I was very quick and very crude, but they're probably a little bit more believable. And then of course what we can also do is we can adjust their opacity to make them more see-through, or let them. But can you see, it doesn't take long at all. Well, you've just got to take your time. And so even if it hadn't done a very good, and now I can see actually they weren't white enough at all. They needed to be whiter. But very quickly, and quite a few of the finished images, I've done that. I've enhanced the swirl even more, because Photoshop's not been quite good enough to bring them all in. And sometimes I've just wanted it to be more dramatic than it actually was on the day, particularly coming off the feet. Tends not to cling.
Well. Yeah, that's
tends not to cling to them.
It's a stunning image, David, and you know, immediately as I saw it, I wondered how you did that, and that's explained it well. Thank you.
Well, there we go. So I'll get rid of that layer because that's trashing it completely. And there we go. So it'd just be a case of file save as now. The TK Action Panel has got a stunning sharpening algorithm in it as well. And if I'll just demonstrate that and then we'll finish. So if I was to now flatten this image and then sharpen it to 1600 horizontal, and you can see it does a stunning job of sharpening. So that's without sharpening. That's with it became altogether more sharp once I made it 1600 pixels, of course, from the the massive size it was to start with.
Yeah.
So there you go. So it really doesn't, because a lot of the groundwork's done, it really doesn't take that long at all, to be honest. And of course, we could have flipped to any angle we want. You can create all sorts of dramatic angles.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely brilliant, David. I mean, it was always impresses me the amount of background research which you do into these things, and it's one of those which is a wow picture, and you always wonder how on earth did you do that, and that's explained superbly. So thank you. That's
You're very welcome. I think it is a really good example. I use it on my workshop actually. I'll tell you why. It's a good example of a combination of doing the background to get the image in the camera, but then taking that as the starting point to use a bit of creativity, and just enhance it really. There is no doubt they jumped off that board. There is no doubt they did all those things. And if the camera had captured it exactly at the right time, it would be as it's shown. But, we're just helping it, aren't we? So.
I mean, being a sports photographer, it's something which you sort of touched on during the talk, is that, I can't adjust pictures, but I love the ability that you have to transform a sports picture from reality into perfection almost, and that you've mastered particularly well. I was going to also ask about this is more really to do with the lighting. Is the two roto lights? Presumably you've got them strobed to the. It looks like you've got a Lincroms above it in the softbox. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So presumably they have about enough power to sort of just kick into the make a little kicker light onto her back of her legs, which gives
her face. And the face.
Yes.
The rotor lights I only bought in on the third shoot. So if you remember from the video, you could see there's two fairly big soft boxes with battery-powered Electron flashes. But I found, and I used those on the first and the second shoot, but there's still, light travels in a straight line, doesn't it? And where their legs was in front of their face, and of course it just casts a shadow.
Yeah.
And I found just having the two little rotor lights low down, angling straight up, then it certainly helped. And I think you can definitely, her face here, and all of her upper body here, and indeed, as you say, these kickers on the back of her leg, I'm pretty sure that they are down to the rotor lights. But I don't find rotor lights very powerful. I don't know if you use them. I mean,
I have used them. I mean, presumably they're on the strobe mode rather than the...
strobe mode. Yeah. I find them, I'll be absolutely honest with you, I find them disappointingly underpowered for, I couldn't, even in these straight LED mode, they're not powerful enough to get a really good shot.
I feel the same. But it's interesting to see somebody use them effectively. I haven't really seen them use that effectively before.
I don't think they're powerful enough, and to be honest, for constant LED lighting, which I do love, then I bought two, I think the newer ones off of the internet, you know what I mean? I think they're about 60 or 70 quid each, and they are super powerful. You can dial it down, you can alter the colour, temperature and what have you. And for constant LED lighting, then I use those. They're much more powerful than the rotor lights. But the rotor lights have the ability to do high-speed sync, which of course was vital for this. Double 250th of a second, and they can do that, and as can the LED.
So that was, that was the third shoot that you did, that you introduced those, and I can see the difference it's made, and certainly on her face. And I can now sort of work out, obviously, if you come from above with the Lincroms, it's going to be sort of cause a shadow. So yes, all worked out.
And these are the things. I mean, I don't, and this is why. I mean, you'd be able to do it because of your contacts in the sport already. This is where you kind of have to build up the confidence of the participants, really, and they have to get into your dream because. And I use Pinterest. I don't know if you use Pinterest online. I share boards. I'll create, I'll get images from around the web, not my own, and pin them, and then say to the participants, "This is the kind of thing I'm after." And I find, so I've done 3 shoots like this with the strobes on the platform, but I think I'd already done about 4 or 5 shoots before to even get to that stage. But people are really, people generally are nice anyway, and you're offering them the chance to get an image of themselves or or the kids or whatever in a way that probably would cost hundreds of pounds to set up. And so as long as it puts a lot of pressure on you, Rob, but you're used to that anyway. You've sold somebody your dream, haven't you? And then you have to go, you have to try and create it. It doesn't always work, but it's a constant refinement. And I was just at the stage, the 14 kids who got these, and the parents were delighted with them. And I was just at the stage where she was going to ask her elite divers, these are Commonwealth Olympic hopeful divers, they were going to do a session, and then I was just going to pay her £100 for the club, and they were going to do it for free because they're training 7 days a week anyway. And I'll just pay £100 into the club's coffers, and she was going to let me. I was going to do it with those. So that's the next, because these are still the junior divers, which I think adds a bit of appeal as well, that they're young. But some of the more senior ones can really throw some shapes, some twists and so on. Because that's the other thing. The participants have to be aware, it doesn't matter what they do, as soon as they've gone past the level of the board, they can do what they want. They do a belly flop if they want. Whereas to start with, they think you're going to be photographing them all the way down. Of course, I can only get one shot the instant they leave the board or the platform. And so it's only what they have to do, jumpy dives, they have to jump as high as they can and do their stuff before they pass the board. And that's quite a big thing. Whereas when you first start, I think basically you allow yourself to topple off, and you use the distance between the board and the water to do your stuff. So it's quite a big thing. So the higher the standard the diver, the better image. But it's a great, and I'm constantly looking for sports, Rob. So the project I've just started is, as I say, with fencers. And I'm hoping to use similar techniques for them with high speed flash and so on.
I'd be fascinated to see that. Because,
and it'll be, I think it could be all right, that one, actually. But I'd love to get some team hurdlers, for instance, because when I shoot hurdling, it's a job, isn't it? Because you never know which lane to focus on. But of course, it's a massive commitment, because it's no good just having one hurdler. You need at least 3 or 4 to create, so. But all stuff for the future.
No, fascinating, David. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Rob.
Very impressive.
I've enjoyed it. And anything else, just shout up, mate. You know that.
The TK Action panel, I haven't got, and I thought it was a PC only piece of software, which.
No, sure about that. Nobody's ever told me that's the case, but it was certainly developed for the PC, so you may well be right. You might be right.
Look into it. I haven't sort of looked into it recently, but so we can get it into
it's wonderful. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful at doing what it was designed to do, which is luminosity masking, which would have been another way to select these drops. Luminosity masking, you probably know, it selects based on the luminosity of the pixels. So it would have been a great technique to use, but as you saw, Photoshop did make a bad job of its own. But I don't use it. I reckon in a year, I perhaps use luminosity masking about 3 times. But I use this panel all the time, just because it's quicker. I mean, you can do, but some of the things, this one here is merge visible, and it just does it in one click. And I think on the actual control, it's like Control Shift E space, and you know what I mean, and I can't remember, and what happens is that distracts your creative flow, doesn't it? You don't really want that, so I find it really, really useful, to be honest. All right, buddy, well, I'll let you get on with your day. And
well, David, thank you very much indeed. So
anytime, just shout up.
Thank you very much, most appreciated. All right, Dave,
take care, bye-bye.
Thank you, cheerio.